Today, I'm going to share with you a fascinating exploration of God's nature, as presented in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Specifically, we'll be looking at the idea that God exists in a form that encompasses both male and female aspects, not in a physical sense, but in the sense of embodying the qualities, roles, and essences that we see in human maleness and femaleness. This idea comes from a close reading of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, where God creates humanity in his image as male and female, and it's supported by interpretations from Jewish and Christian traditions. Here's what you can expect. We'll start by examining key passages in Genesis, focusing on the creation of Adam and Eve, and we'll dig into the original Hebrew words to uncover their deeper meanings. We'll see how Adam and Eve's roles, Adam as an initiator, and Eve as a life-giver, reflect different aspects of God's nature, which we'll describe as masculine and feminine qualities. Then we'll look at how Jewish and Christian groups have interpreted these passages over the centuries, showing how they support the idea that God unifies both male and female aspects in a single divine essence. By the end, you'll have a clear understanding of how Genesis portrays God as a creator who transcends gender but includes the qualities of both, as reflected in the first man and woman. This narration will be detailed, but I'll explain everything step by step, including the meaning of Hebrew terms and the context of the ancient world, so you can follow along even if you're not familiar with the Bible or theology. My goal is to help you see the depth and beauty of this biblical perspective on God's nature and how it reveals the value of both men and women as reflections of the divine. So, let's begin. Understanding God's nature as male and female in the book of Genesis. A detailed explanation. This explanation explores the idea that God, as presented in the book of Genesis, exists in a form that encompasses both male and female aspects, not in a physical sense, but in the sense of embodying the qualities, roles, and essences that are expressed in human maleness and femaleness. This conclusion is drawn from a close reading of the biblical text in its original Hebrew language, focusing on the creation of humanity in Genesis 1 and 2, and is supported by interpretive traditions from Jewish and Christian groups. The goal is to provide a clear, detailed understanding of how the text and these traditions lead to the conclusion that God's nature unifies both masculine and feminine aspects, as reflected in the creation of Adam and Eve. Section 1, the biblical foundation, Genesis 1, 26-27, and the image of God. The starting point for this exploration is Genesis 1, 26-27, which describes the creation of humanity. Genesis 1, 26-27, NIV. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Key terms and their meanings. To understand this passage, we need to look at the original Hebrew words and their implications. God, Elohim. The Hebrew word for God here is Elohim, which is a plural noun but used with singular verbs when referring to the God of Israel. This grammatical structure suggests a singular divine being with a complex nature. The plural form has led some to speculate about a multifaceted aspect of God, which we'll explore in relation to male and female. Mankind, Adam. The Hebrew word Adam in this context refers to humanity as a whole, not the individual man named Adam who is introduced in Genesis 2. Here, Adam is created as male and female, meaning that humanity collectively bears God's image. Image, tselem, and likeness, demut. The words tselem, image, and demut, likeness, mean that humanity reflects God in some way. This isn't about physical appearance, since God is spirit, as later biblical texts like John 4:24 confirm, but about attributes like creativity, relationality, or the ability to rule over creation, as mentioned in verse 26, so that they may rule. Male and female, zakar and nekiva. The Hebrew terms zakar, male, and nekiva, female, specify that humanity is created with a gender distinction. Importantly, the text says that this Adam, male and female together, bears God's image. This means that the fullness of God's image is expressed through both male and female, not just one or the other. Let us, our. The use of plural pronouns, us and our, in Genesis 1:26 is significant. In the ancient context, this could be a royal we, like a king speaking for his court, or it could indicate a conversation within the divine realm. Some suggest God speaking to angels. However, since the very next verse, 127, specifies that God's image is reflected in male and female, the plural us can also be understood as hinting at a complexity within God's nature that includes both masculine and feminine aspects. What this means for God's nature. The key takeaway from Genesis 1:26 to 27 is that God's image is reflected in humanity as male and female. If humanity, as male and female, bears God's image, then God's nature must include the qualities or essences that are expressed in both maleness and femaleness. In the ancient Near Eastern context, maleness was often associated with roles like authority, initiation, and provision, while femaleness was associated with nurturing, life-giving, and relationality. Since both male and female together reflect God's image, God must encompass both sets of qualities, masculine and feminine, in a unified divine nature. Section 2, the creation of Eve and her role, Genesis 2:18 to 24. Genesis 2 provides a more detailed account of the creation of the first man and woman, which helps us understand how their roles reflect God's nature. Genesis 2:18-20 to 23, NIV. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Genesis 3:20, NIV. Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. Key terms and their meanings. Helper, Ezer Kenegdo. Eve is described as a helper suitable for Adam, which in Hebrew is Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer means help or helper, and it's a term of strength often used for God himself in the Bible, e.g. Psalm 121, 1-2, "My help, Ezer, comes from the Lord." This shows that Eve's role as a helper is not about being inferior, but about being a strong partner. Kenegdo means corresponding to or opposite to, indicating that Eve complements Adam in a way that matches him perfectly. She is his equal partner, but she brings something unique that he lacks. Man and woman, Ish and Ishshah. In Genesis 2:23, the man Ish names the woman Ishshah, a play on words in Hebrew that shows their close connection. Eve is taken from Adam's side. The Hebrew word tsela can mean rib or side, meaning she was part of him but is now distinct. This suggests that the original Adam, before Eve's creation, contained both male and female potential. Eve, Chava. In Genesis 3:20, Adam names his wife Chava, Eve, which means life or living, because she would become the mother of all the living. This name directly ties Eve's identity to her role in giving birth and bringing forth new life. Eve's unique role, giving new life. Eve's role as a helper is crucial because she provides something Adam cannot do on his own, the ability to give new life through childbirth. In Genesis 1:28, God commands humanity to be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. This command to be fruitful requires both male and female. Adam provides the seed, as seen in biblical genealogies where children are often attributed to the father, but Eve's body nurtures, forms, and brings that life into the world through birth. This life-giving role is unique to Eve as a female, and it's central to her identity as the mother of all the living. In the ancient context, the ability to create life was seen as a divine power. By giving Eve this role, the text positions her as a co-creator with God in the ongoing act of creation. Even after the fall, when Eve's pain in childbirth is increased, Genesis 3:16, her role as a life-giver remains central, reflecting a sacrificial love that mirrors God's own commitment to sustaining life, e.g. Genesis 3:15, where the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head, promising redemption. What this means for God's nature. Since Eve as a female is part of the Adam that reflects God's image, Genesis 1:27, her unique role in giving new life points to a feminine aspect of God's nature. God is the ultimate source of life in Genesis, creating all living things and breathing the breath of life into Adam, Genesis 2:7. Eve's ability to give life mirrors this divine quality, suggesting that God's nature includes a feminine, life-giving, nurturing aspect. Meanwhile, Adam's role, initiating life through his seed and exercising authority over creation, e.g., naming the animals in Genesis 2:19-20, reflects a more traditionally masculine aspect of God, such as the authoritative, commanding power seen in Genesis 1, "Let there be light." Section 3. Adam and Eve as reflections of God's male and female aspects. Now let's connect Adam and Eve's roles to the broader picture of God's nature. Masculine aspect of God reflected in Adam. In Genesis 1, God creates through speech, "Let there be," an act of authority and initiation. This aligns with Adam's role as the one who names the animals, Genesis 2:19-20, an act of authority, and as the one who provides the seed for new life. In the ancient context, these qualities, authority, initiation, and provision, were often associated with masculinity. This suggests that God's nature includes a masculine aspect, reflected in Adam. Feminine aspect of God, reflected in Eve. Eve's role as the mother of all the living, giving birth and nurturing new life, mirrors God's life-giving and sustaining power. The intimate act of God breathing life into Adam, Genesis 2:7, and the ongoing creation of living creatures in Genesis 1 show God as a nurturer and sustainer of life. These qualities, nurturing, life-giving, and relational, were often associated with femininity in the ancient context, suggesting that God's nature includes a feminine aspect, reflected in Eve. Unified nature of God, Genesis 1:27, states that God's image is reflected in humanity as male and female together. This means that God's nature isn't limited to one gender, but includes both masculine and feminine qualities in a unified whole. The original Adam, before Eve's creation, contained both male and female potential, as Eve was taken from his side, just as God contains both within the divine essence. The differentiation of Adam into male and female, Adam and Eve, mirrors the way God's unified nature can be expressed through both masculine and feminine roles. Section 4. Supporting evidence from Genesis 5 and the fall, Genesis 5:1-2, NIV. This is the written account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and he named them mankind when they were created. This passage reinforces Genesis 1:27, emphasizing that the Adam, mankind, created in God's likeness, is male and female, underscoring that both genders together reflect God's nature. The fall, Genesis 3. Even after the fall, Eve's role as a life-giver remains central. In Genesis 3:16, God says to Eve, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children." This highlights the sacrificial nature of her life-giving role, which parallels God's own sacrificial love in continuing to sustain humanity despite the fall, for example, Genesis 3:15, the promise of redemption through the woman's seed. This life-giving quality, even through pain, further reflects a feminine aspect of God's nature. Section 5. Interpretive traditions. Jewish and Christian perspectives. To provide a broader context, let's look at how Jewish and Christian groups have interpreted these passages, as their insights help confirm the textual analysis. Jewish interpretations, rabbinic tradition, Talmud and Midrash. Ancient Jewish rabbis, in texts like Genesis Rabbah, a Midrash, suggested that the first Adam was androgynous, a single being with both male and female aspects, before being separated into Adam and Eve. This interpretation aligns with the idea that God's image, which Adam reflects, includes both male and female qualities. Kabbalistic tradition, mystical Judaism. In Kabbalah, God's nature is described using the Sephirot, 10 attributes through which God interacts with the world. Some Sephirot are associated with masculine qualities, for example, Chokmah, wisdom, while others are associated with feminine qualities, for example, Binah, understanding, and Malkut, sovereignty, often linked to the Shekinah, the feminine divine presence. The Shekinah is seen as the nurturing, motherly aspect of God, complementing the more transcendent masculine aspects. Kabbalists view the unity of God as a balance of masculine and feminine, reflected in the creation of Adam and Eve. Modern Jewish thought. Modern Jewish thinkers, especially in progressive movements, often emphasize that God transcends gender, but includes both masculine and feminine qualities, as seen in Genesis 1:27. They point to biblical imagery of God as both a warrior, masculine, Exodus 15:3, and a mother, feminine, Isaiah 66:13, to support this view. Christian interpretations, early church fathers. Early Christian thinkers like Augustine and Gregory of Nyssa argued that God transcends gender, but they acknowledged that the creation of male and female in God's image suggests that both genders reflect divine attributes. Gregory speculated that the original Adam was neither male nor female, implying that God's image includes the potential for both. Medieval mystics like Julian of Norwich, 14th century, explicitly described God as both father and mother, emphasizing God's nurturing, life-giving love as a motherly quality. Julian wrote, "As truly as God is our father, so truly is God our mother," connecting this to God's role in giving life, much like Eve's role as the mother of all the living. Reformation and Protestant traditions. Reformers like John Calvin focused on God's transcendence, but acknowledged that God's image in male and female means both genders reflect divine qualities. Modern Protestant theologians, especially feminist theologians like Phyllis Tribble, highlight Eve's life-giving role as a reflection of God's feminine aspect. Catholic tradition. The Catholic Church traditionally uses masculine language for God, for example, Father in the Trinity, but the Catechism, CCC 370, states that God transcends the human distinction between the sexes, and both man and woman reflect something of God's infinite perfection. Catholic mystics like Teresa of Avila often used nurturing feminine imagery for God. Modern Christian thought. Feminist theologians like Elizabeth Johnson argue that Genesis 1:27 supports a view of God that includes feminine aspects, pointing to Eve's role as a life-giver. Progressive Christian denominations often use gender-inclusive language for God, reflecting the idea that God's image is male and female. What these traditions add, both Jewish and Christian traditions, support the idea that God's nature includes both masculine and feminine aspects, unified in the divine essence. The Jewish concept of the Shekinah and the Christian imagery of God as both father and mother align with the textual evidence from Genesis, showing that Adam and Eve's complementary roles reflect a divine balance of masculine and feminine qualities. Section 6. Final conclusion. God's nature as male and female. Putting it all together. The book of Genesis, when examined closely, reveals that God exists in a form that encompasses both male and female aspects, not in a physical sense, but in the sense of embodying the qualities, roles, and essences that are expressed in human maleness and femaleness. Here's how we arrive at this conclusion. God's image in male and female, Genesis 1:26-27. The text states that God created humanity, Adam, in his image, and this Adam is male and female. This means that the fullness of God's image is expressed through both genders together, not just one. If humanity reflects God's image as male and female, then God's nature must include the qualities associated with both, masculine, for example, authority, initiation, and feminine, for example, nurturing, life-giving. The roles of Adam and Eve, Genesis 2, Adam's role, masculine. Adam initiates life through his seed and exercises authority by naming the animals, Genesis 2:19-20. This reflects God's authoritative initiating power in creation, let there be, which aligns with masculine qualities in the ancient context. Eve's role, feminine. Eve, as the mother of all the living, Genesis 3:20, gives birth and nurtures new life, a role Adam cannot fulfill. This mirrors God's life-giving, sustaining power, seen in the act of breathing life into Adam, Genesis 2:7, which aligns with feminine qualities. Unity in the original Adam. Before Eve's creation, the first Adam contained both male and female potential. Eve was taken from his side, Genesis 2:21-22. Since this Adam was made in God's image, God must also contain both masculine and feminine aspects in a unified whole, which are then differentiated in the creation of Adam and Eve. Support from the fall and beyond. Even after the fall, Eve's life-giving role remains central, Genesis 3:16, reflecting a sacrificial love that parallels God's commitment to humanity. This further highlights the feminine aspect of God's nature, while Adam's role continues to reflect the masculine. Jewish and Christian traditions. Jewish traditions, like the Midrash's androgynous Adam and the Kabbalistic Shekinah, describe God with both masculine and feminine qualities. Christian traditions, from mystics like Julian of Norwich to modern feminist theologians, affirm that God transcends gender, but includes both masculine and feminine aspects, as seen in the complementarity of Adam and Eve. The final picture of God's nature. God in Genesis is the ultimate reality, a singular divine being who unifies both masculine and feminine qualities within the divine essence. This is not about God having a physical gender, God is spirit, but about God embodying the attributes that humanity expresses in gendered forms. Masculine aspect. God's authoritative, initiating power, seen in the creation commands of Genesis 1, is reflected in Adam's role as the initiator of life and authority over creation. feminine aspect, God's life-giving, nurturing power, seen in the act of breathing life into Adam and sustaining creation, is reflected in Eve's role as the mother of all the living, giving birth and nurturing new life. Unified nature. Just as Adam and Eve together reflect God's image, God unifies these masculine and feminine qualities in a single divine essence. The original Adam, containing both male and female potential, mirrors this divine unity, which is then expressed through the complementary roles of Adam and Eve. Why this matters? Understanding. God as encompassing both male and female aspects highlights the relational complementary nature of humanity as created in God's image. It shows that both men and women reflect God's nature and their roles, whether initiating life, Adam, or giving life, Eve, are essential to fulfilling God's command to be fruitful and increase in number, Genesis 1:28. It also reveals the depth of God's nature as a creator who is both powerful and nurturing, authoritative and life-giving, unified in a way that transcends human gender, while including the qualities expressed in both. Summary for clarity. In simple terms, the book of Genesis shows that God created humanity as male and female in his image, Genesis 1:27. This means God's nature includes both the masculine qualities, like authority and initiation, seen in Adam, and the feminine qualities, like nurturing and life-giving, seen in Eve. The original human, Adam, contained both male and female potential, reflecting a God who unifies both aspects in the divine essence. Jewish and Christian traditions support this by describing God with both masculine and feminine imagery, confirming that God transcends gender but encompasses the qualities of both. Therefore, God exists as both male and female in a metaphorical sense, unified in a single, divine nature that Adam and Eve reflect through their complementary roles.